the right way across this swampy bog. So all they could do was to start crossing, hopping from log to log, small island to small island, and hope the path reveals itself during the trip across. Andy, however, just couldn't shake this strange feeling he felt ever since they got down here. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, as he felt as if they were being watched, tracked. Something, or maybe someone, knew they were there. He constantly looked around at the tree line as he watched Sara cross behind him, while the two made their way from one side of the bog to the other. As they approached the middle of the bog, there were two crows flying low across the bog next to them, paralleling their every step. The birds were taunting them with the ease in which they could fly from one side to the other. Watching them. And at this point, another breeze blew in and the air temperature instantly dropped. Sara felt the chill in the air and she turned around to look at Andy, who was already checking his small thermometer keychain that he attaches to the front of his backpack. And the temperature dropped over 20 degrees as the two nervously looked around the bog, noticing the silence all around them, wondering how could it get so cold so suddenly. They kept moving, and little by little they made their way across the bog. Andy finished crossing and made it to what they believed was the trail on the other side. Success. He then turned around to take a photo of Sara while she was crossing. But as he looked at the screen, he saw something big with giant wings sitting up in the trees directly behind her. Andy immediately looked up from the phone at the woods, and it was gone. Vanished. Hey, did you get it? Andy. Earth to Andy. Did you take the photo? Sara yelled out as Andy was lost in confusion. His eyes frantically browsed the tree line surrounding the bog, positive he just saw something big, something strange sitting in the trees watching them. Yeah, I think so. I got it, he nervously said. Unsure if he should tell Sara what he just saw, he anxiously uttered, "That was weird. I swear I just saw something huge with giant wings sitting in the trees behind you. But then when I looked up, it was gone." Sara laughed as she finished crossing and told him to stop messing with her. "I don't believe in that nonsense. It's probably just a tree," she replied. Andy was shaken, however, and given the fact that he felt uneasy ever since arriving at the bog, along with the strange crows and the drastic temperature changes, he wasn't so sure. Something strange was going on down here. At this point, they were across the bog. The hard part was over. For now. Until they have to cross back over it, of course. From here, it was just a hop, skip, and a jump to the summit of Couchsacraga. And Sara led while Andy followed, constantly looking back and around the woods. Unable to shake the uneasiness he felt, he constantly jumped at every noise the woods made. Every crack, every chirp, every chipmunk. About 30 feet up the trail from the bog, as they walked along the mostly dirt-covered path, they came to a swarm of a dozen crows huddled together right in the middle of the trail, surrounding what they assumed was maybe a dead animal. A strange place to congregate, but then again, everything seemed strange down here. The two approached the birds, and Andy was in front this time with Sara behind, and as they moved closer, the birds scattered. They flew in every which direction and revealed what they were surrounding. A backpack. Did this belong to the mystery camper at the lean-to? Maybe he's up here. Maybe the distraught hiker they passed yesterday without a pack. So many questions went through their minds when they saw this. Then they set the pack to the side of the trail and they carried on with their hike. After all, they still had some peaks to climb. Soon they came out onto the tree-covered summit ledge, marked by a brown and yellow wooden sign stating Couchsacraga Peak. And this was number 45 of 46. The joys of being one peak away from accomplishing their goal wasn't able to help Andy ease his mind. He was still nervous in these woods. The final mountain was in sight, but while on the summit they stood next to each other to take a photo with the sign. Andy turned the phone around and quickly snapped a shot to chronicle number 45 of 46, as they always do. And then after they took the photo and looked at the picture, they noticed a crow standing on top of the sign in the back of the picture. They quickly turned around and noticed now 2 crows standing on top of the Couchsacraga sign, a mere inches from their heads, and they never even heard them fly in. Again, just silently staring at them. Seconds later, another crow flew by and the 2 followed suit, taking flight and leaving. It was hard to ignore all these crows seemingly following the couple in the woods all day. And on top of Andy's strange feelings he'd felt since arriving at the bog, he was tense. Moments later, the wind started to pick up and the scattered white puffy clouds which filled the mostly blue sky were now getting darker, blacker. There was much less blue than before. Despite a weekend forecast of sunshine, the sky was dark and ominous. Not like a forecast means anything here in the remote parts of the Adirondack backcountry. The trip to Couchsacraga took much longer than anticipated, and after an already much later start than they planned, they didn't stay long in an effort to keep moving. Plus, they were only 1 peak away from becoming 46ers. Sara jumped off the summit rock first, followed by Andy. But as he put one hand down on the ledge and started to jump, 2 crows flew directly into his chest, flapping their wings in front of his face as they brushed against his nose and his mouth, and he landed awkwardly below. But as he came down, unable to see where his foot landed, he came crashing down onto a root, and the unthinkable happened. He rolled his ankle. Bad. "Oh, no, this is not good," he yelled out to Sara as he tried to take a step, immediately falling to the ground. Sara ran back up and asked what happened. He told her about the random crows and didn't know if it was broken or not. "This place is cursed with crows," Sara said in frustration. Having never experienced an injury, they didn't know what to do, and they were as deep in the high peaks as they could be. Calling for a search and rescue would take many people, many hours to get out here, especially with the nightfall approaching. As they weighed their options, suddenly they heard the sound of crashing thunder above. The weather had changed, and the sunny skies they started out with were now dark, storm-ridden, almost mirroring how their own hike was going. A storm seemed to be approaching, and he had no choice but to try to hobble out of the woods. Being almost twice the size of Sara, and sunset not far off, it was going to be a long, long trip. They continued down the trail, very slowly, hopping the best he could while using his trekking poles like crutches. The sun was going down and the thunder kept roaring in the distance. No rain yet, thankfully. They had to get back across the bog before the sun went down. Crossing that at night, in his condition, would be treacherous. The 2 kept slowly limping their way down. Andy's anxiety grew as he thought about that feeling he experienced earlier at the bog. And that weird thing he swore he saw up in the trees. Something strange was down there, but he still couldn't pinpoint what exactly he saw or why he felt the way he did. Each step took so much work in this terrain. Too much work. It was time to come up with a better plan, because time was running out and the sun was setting. They stopped along the trail, and Andy didn't want to take his foot out of his boot due to the swelling that would immediately occur, but he realized he didn't have a choice. Unfortunately, both of them carried an ace bandage in their pack, so it was time to wrap his ankle as tight as they could. It was their best option for Andy to have a chance at crossing the bog. He loosened his boot as much as possible and just barely fit his swollen black and blue foot back inside the boot. As they stood up and began to take their first step forward, they noticed one single crow standing directly in front of them on the trail, only a few feet away now. And unlike the other crows, this crow started cawing at them, over and over. The temperature suddenly dropped once again and an ice-cold breeze blew in. Was this a warning? Were the birds telling them to leave? Were all these birds a coincidence? The thunder continued to hit every 10 minutes as they limped down the trail, slightly faster now with the bandage, and they finally made it to the bog, hours after leaving the summit only half a mile away. The large, desolate swamp was lit up by the moonlight shining through the stormy clouds. It was time to pull out their headlamps and pray the batteries didn't die. The bog was dark, and that feeling Andy felt earlier, being watched, the uneasiness, it was back. Only this time it was thicker, fiercer. And to make matters worse, he was injured now. A sitting duck. The only thing they could do was go slowly, and methodically. So Andy put on his headlamp and Sara wore hers as she led the way. However, a mere seconds after clicking hers on, the light quickly faded away. Her batteries were dead. The worst time for them to die, and now they were down to just Andy's headlamp. So as their nerves grew and this supposed-to-be joyous day slowly turned into a nightmare, Sara put her dead headlamp in her pack and wore Andy's. It was time to cross. She chose her steps wisely. Every move was calculated, what you'd expect from two engineers, mapping out their route across the swamp, one by one, slow and steady. The bog was quiet. Only the sound of occasional swirling light wind gusts. Their plan was working. Andy was in pain, but he was doing what he needed to do to get out of the woods and across the bog. Sara would take a couple steps and then turn around and shine the light on Andy to light up his path. And moments later, the mood changed. A chill was in the air again, and the wind blew harder. They could feel the birds flying above them. Only this time, Sara felt the uneasiness that Andy experienced all day. "Something's not right here," she nervously said to Andy as he hobbled his way across the bog, using his trekking poles to balance on a half-submerged log. Andy didn't want to worry Sara, so he never said anything to her, but the feeling was mutual. The feeling of being watched. Andy then stepped from one log onto another dead tree, which immediately snapped in half, causing him to sink into the swamp halfway up to his thigh as he let out a painful screech. He almost fell back first into the bog, but was able to grab onto a small branch next to him for balance. And as he stood half in the bog, half out, he tried to hoist himself onto a log with his good leg and his poles. But it was at this moment, everything changed. Thunder roared again, and the sky was immediately filled with dozens of crying crows, swarming above them, flying directly past Andy from all sides as he desperately tried to get his leg out of the bog. The crows continued to scream at them and swarm their heads, plucking at their backpacks as they both swung their poles in defense. They were stranded in the middle of the bog, injured, in the dark, with one light between the two of them. The crows were relentless, dozens of them. "What is happening?" Sara yelled out as she swung her poles at the birds, circling her head around her injured boyfriend as the light from her headlamp flashed around the swamp. The howling wind blew harder as the crows continued to yell. Andy and Sara hopped across the bog as they were being harassed. Thunder roared. Then as Sara looked back to Andy, she saw it. In the darkness, standing at the tree line, it launched into the air, heading right towards them. She screamed as Andy immediately turned around and caught a glimpse of what he knew he saw earlier today, soaring through the dark sky towards them, like a small plane. A creature so large he could see it through the darkness across the bog. It was a crow, but taller than a man, with a wingspan so long it disappeared into the shadow. It had to be 10 feet across, and its bright yellow eyes glowed in the darkness as it soared towards them. It screamed at them with the fiercest shriek. The crows continued to swarm as the large creature was gliding towards Andy, flying across the bog, getting closer and closer as its giant wings flapped in the air. Andy and Sara jumped from log to log, with no concern about where they stepped now, moving as fast as they could through the swamp. Adrenaline ran so hard through their bodies, Andy couldn't feel the pain anymore. It was about getting across the bog now. The giant winged creature got closer, the wingspan bigger and bigger. Andy and Sara were almost across. The shrieking was loud, the wind was stronger, thunder and lightning crashed everywhere. Sara finally made it to the other side. Immediately she turned towards Andy, lighting up his path as the giant crow-like creature grabbed him by his backpack, a mere steps from the bog's edge. She screamed as Andy felt the pull from the creature's legs, clasped to his backpack while the giant black wings flapped above and engulfed his entire body. Quickly, he unclipped the pack from his body and managed to slip out of the straps, setting himself free as he jumped the final steps towards Sara. Without hesitation, Andy grabbed her hand and the two immediately ran up the dirt trail, away from the bog, back towards Times Square. The crows continued to scream. Thunder crashed down. Andy moved at full speed as they climbed the trail, jumping up the ledges, running the flats. They were moving away from the bog as quickly as they could, and then they made it to Times Square in what felt like seconds, a mile away from the bog now. At this point, the woods became silent. The crows were gone. They thought the next time